What did you think of it?
It sucks.
Yeah. Really?
It's like the worst Gotway I've ever ridden.
Oh. The Gotway EX is a wheel that few had actually asked for. It was made by a company that had been skeptical of adding suspension to electric unicycle, with a die-hard fan base that also shared a similar skepticism of adding suspension to their ride. It was made in response to threats from its competitors, who all had released suspension wheels that had all but captured the imagination of the EUC customer base this year. All the while during a time when its supremacy of ultimate speed was challenged for the first time by an arch rival that is of their own making, no less. It was rushed and delayed and finally made it to a marketplace at just about the worst possible time, with a price tag that was seemingly unappealing to just about everybody. And this week, I'm going to review the Gotway EX and tell you why that despite all of its flaws, that this wheel may still be worthy of your attention. This time, Gotway had actually heard our complaint and is preparing to provide a response. Are you ready to meet the wheel that nobody loved all over again? Roll the intro. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and click on that bell icon to be notified of new episodes. Shortly after the introduction of the S18, the president of Gotway made this post on Facebook talking about how the engineer who designed the V11 suspension had gone free agent some time ago and had approached Gotway to offer his expertise. Now ultimately, Hsiang had won the bidding war, and that led to the genesis of the S18. Now I had no way of verifying his claim, and his post was quickly taken down. But regardless of the actual messy detail, that was the point when Gotway realized that the race to build the suspension electric unicycle is on, and committed themselves to the effort that would eventually lead to this. And for the past week, I've been riding this wheel as much as I can and push it as far as I dare in effort to understand exactly what it is that Gotway had created with the EX. And what I can say is this: that Gotway has solved the suspension problem in the most Gotway approach possible, and that is both its strength as well as its Achilles heel. And as hard as it is for you to believe, given its many shortcomings as well as high price, I truly believe that it may yet still be possible for you to learn to love the EX. But in order for you to do that, you must first understand what it actually means to love a Gotway wheel. I had a long fascination with the Euro, modeled after the 1930 BMW R71 and then after the Russian mountain range, where its factory had to be relocated so as to be safe from the Nazi events during the Second World War. And against all odds, Euro had continued to produce pretty much the same bike till this day. It is slow, mechanically antiquated, and there are no logical reason why anyone should like this bike, but I do. I mean, just look at this thing. In very many ways, Gotway actually remind me of Euro, despite the fact that it produced one of the most high-performance vehicles in a bleeding-edge niche. To me, the soul of all Gotway wheels are all very much rooted in their engineering, and align with the same utilitarian worldview of a motorcycle company that has stuck to the same model for 90 years. They both produce eccentric products that aren't the results of marketing studies or consumer focus groups. And the best example from Gotway is probably the M Supers. I never really liked their design nor the many quirks or problems that require aftermarket solutions, and the fact that it requires mods like the custom side pad just to be ridden properly. But I also can't deny the fact that it is one of the best electric unicycles you can buy on the market.
its combination of weight, torque, and speed is unmatched by just about anything else available, including the mighty veteran Sherman.
Which is the reason why the many M Super riders I know will likely never ride anything else, and like the Euro, Gotway had continued to refine the formula with small updates, always focusing on the core riding experience while unfortunately ignoring all others.
This is the reason why I love New York. You find so many random cool things right underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, man. Unbelievable. And that same philosophy also lies at the core of the EX. Having taken it apart and reassemble it, I have to say that I can't think of any obvious failure point, and that as long as you're taking all the regular precaution as you should with all Gotway wheels, waterproofing, maintenance, and regular inspections, you are doing all of that, aren't you?
You should have little issues with the wheel. The only exception is the high-pressure air shock cylinder. It is a pretty unusual setup, so I don't really know how well it's going to hold up over time. V, who also have a pre-production EX, had noticed rust spots, so there's that.
Speaking of which, let's talk about how its suspension actually performs. And to do that, we will need to talk about the 3 C's of suspension. And if you've seen my review of the S18, then you may have already known that they are contact, control, and comfort. But I'm going to switch the order up a little bit for a reason I'm going to explain a little bit later on. And we're going to first talk about comfort. Compared to the Gotway Monster, which in my opinion was previously the most comfortable Gotway you can possibly ride because of its large diameter, stable and low pressure and very cushy tire, as well as its tall and easy to live with seat.
The EX still wins hands down. I have had enough miles on the Monster to know what kind of potholes and surfaces it can absorb and what will shake it, and the EX had zero problem eating all of it and more. Hopping off of tall curbs still sends a jolt up my legs on the Monster, while the EX on the other hand soaks it up so well that I have to remind myself this wheel weighs as much as it does. It competently dealt with the worst of the cobblestone street I can throw at it, and I also partly suspect that its much greater weight helped with its stability. However, comparing with either of its suspension competitors, the EX still comes up a little bit short. It lacked the suppleness of a properly tuned S18, and it can't match the cushiness of the V11 either. With more travel, both of its competitors can also accommodate a greater range of conditions based on a single pressure setting. There are some movements between the 2 separate suspension stages, and you can feel it click whenever you hit a large bump, which is disconcerting.
Don't get me wrong, the suspension on the EX still beat wheels that don't have one by a mile. All I'm saying is that if comfort is your primary concern, then there may be better choices for you out there.
The second aspect of suspension is contact, and here, in my opinion, is the main advantage having a suspension adds to the Gotway formula. The short of it is that suspension system reduced the unsprung weight down to the motor and wheel assembly, and so allowed the wheel to follow whatever surfaces you're rolling over at a rate that your knees could have never kept up.
And with increased contact time comes improved traction, and again, since we only have a single wheel, having it firmly planted to the ground would notably improve both the performance as well as the safety of your wheel.
Here's the EX and a Sherman rolling down the sand patch of terrible road, and you can tell how much of a difference the suspension made by just looking at how much bounce Mickey is getting on the Sherman. Remember that every single time you bounce in response to hitting a bump, even if you don't get air, that is still a reduction in the pressure your tire exerts on the ground, which leads to reduced traction.
At higher speed, the differences is noticeable and confident inspiring, even when compared against wheels with better balances, such as the veteran Sherman. And with its ability to tackle all kinds of surfaces and conditions, it almost feels like you can roll over just about anything that comes across your path whenever you ride.
And although the suspension on the S18 is more responsive, the EX is able to offset some of the differences by applying a significant greater amount of torque from its 3500 watt motor. with the net result being a wheel that I feel like I can ride over just about anything. I did experiment with some off-roading, but here the limitation of the suspension shows, as its tolerance for condition based on pressure is narrower than that of the S18 suspension. If you stiffen it for higher speed rides, it is too stiff, but if you drop the pressure for off-road, it will bomb out whenever you hit a big pothole on the road.
But it is the last aspect of control where Gotway's homebrew two-stage solution come up short. The ride feel of the suspension system on the Gotway EX is rather vague, and the clicks you get from the mechanical linkage further confuse matter.
By comparison, on the S18, properly dialed in, the progressive shock is able to dampen hits while still telegram roll and motor feels to the feet. Incredibly important to performance rider when they push a wheel hard. It is also harder to dial in the pressure just right, since you can't partially bleed the air suspension. If you pump it slightly too high, then you have to repeat the whole procedure all over again. And the large pump and high pressure does not allow for easy precision adjustment either. And despite experimenting with multiple pressure settings, I wasn't able to find one that sharpened roll feedback without stiffening the suspension so much as to reduce its benefit.
And the disconnect from the road and motor feel has been one of the primary reasons why a lot of performance rider has been skeptical of the addition of suspension to electric unicycle. And unfortunately, I don't think the suspension system on the EX is going to change very many minds when it comes to that.
Keep in mind that it is wholly possible to overcome this issue with some practice and familiarity with a wheel, but it will certainly take some work.
So my overall impression of the EX suspension is rather mixed. It definitely feels like a Gen 1 product with many of the kinks yet to be worked out. And unfortunately, as I have suspected previously, that it is the worst suspension system out of the 3 wheels that have been released this year. Now, I may have ridden the EX off completely if it weren't for the one ace it has up its sleeve, that 3500 watt motor.
Let me just say that this is bar none the torquiest wheel on the market. More so than the Sherman, the MSP torque, and although I haven't tried it yet, I'm sure the RS torque also. had never ran out of torque for me, on-road acceleration or off-road hill climbs. For your $3,000, you are buying the most powerful wheel on the market right now. And with its smaller diameter wheels, it should also out-torque the coming Monster Pro.
But like the suspension, there are also some caveats to that.
First, the firmware on the pre-production wheel now requires heavy input to pull out those torque, and as a result it feels sluggish in both acceleration and braking. With proper pads locking your feet in and steep leans, you're able to pull out some impressive speed very quickly, but I dislike the Superman lean, as people call it, since it puts you far off center and more prone to losing your balance and have worse falls when you do, i.e. faceplant.
By the way, this is not a feature, it's a bug. If you have to stomp hard on the gas pedal of your car just to get it to go, you would think that it's broken. And I really don't think it's right that an electric unicycle rider would have to assume an unsafe and unstable posture just to pull performance out of their wheel.
And the EX is the worst offender of this, and it also partly for this reason that I have come nowhere close to its maximum acceleration rate because of the streets of New York with its chaotic conditions rarely allow for enough of a safety margin to try something like this, at least for me. Speaking of firmware issue, there's also a pronounced roughly 15-degree forward dip even in medium mode when you're riding above 30 miles per hour. At roughly 35, the wheel catch up and suddenly tries to correct itself, which is jarring, especially at that kind of speed, almost feel like a tiltback. The wheel is also prone to oscillation if your tire isn't perfectly even and balanced. I was getting terrible oscillation at speed, and even after reinflating the tire 3 times and soaping the tire beads and getting the differential down to less than 1/8 of an inch, the oscillation is still noticeable.
I did not notice this issue on the S18 even though I did a piss poor job of replacing the tube as well as aligning the tire after the installation, and as a result the wheel actually visibly wobble when it spins. But then again, neither it nor the V11 are capable of cruising at speed much above 30 miles per hour where such issues are most pronounced.
Both Mick and I had spoken with Jason about these issues, and supposedly Gotway will provide a fix, including, get this, a new and hopefully better trolley handle.
Despite all of its issue, let me say this. Where the veteran Sherman really shine, I think it's its performance when pushed to the upper end of its speed limit. But I think even the most aggressive speed rider would admit that cruising at that kind of speed, and I'm talking about 35 miles per hour plus, only represent a small portion of their total ride time.
But the benefit of a suspension system, on the other hand, can be enjoyed regardless of speed, and with the EX, you get a unique combination of both. Which in the end is always the selling point of buying a Gotway. For all of their faults, you're buying a somewhat experimental product, and like the Euro, you better be ready to put in the time both in maintenance and to step up your riding skill. But in exchange, when all of the stars align, you do get a ride experience that is nothing short of miraculous.
If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
Oh man, look at the time. I somehow managed to waste another 15 minutes of your life, but I hope you enjoy it. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and check out the link to my Patreon page if you like to support my work. And as much as we all love electric unicycle, the only way for us to get better wheels is to grow as a community. So tell your friends and teach them how to ride and get them hooked. Until the next video, thank you.